you so much, everybody, for coming today for our April TED Talk. We're so happy to have all of you joining us here today, and also Mr. Jeffrey Nardone of the Mayflower Brewing Company located in Plymouth, Massachusetts, my hometown. He's here to speak with us after the TED Talk presentation that will be shown by Mr. Chad Henderson of Nardone Brewing Company about the Zen and Art of Craft Brewing. So the presentation on the screen will take approximately 20 minutes. After that, there will be a presentation by both Jeff and myself, as well as a Q&A session to speak to you about the art of craft brewing and the entire brewing process, and specifically also in relation to our friends at Mayflower, who Jeff is representing today. So without further ado, and without to take up any more time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Mr. Jeffrey Nardone of the Mayflower Brewing Company.
Good morning.
Morning.
How you guys doing? Got a nice tight group. I normally wouldn't use a microphone, but we have a camera, so there you go. Welcome. I am with Mayflower Brewing Company. We have been a craft brewery right down the road from you guys for, this is our 10th year, actually. We get started in 2008. Started by the son of, the great-grandson, I should say, of John Alden, who was the cooper aboard the Mayflower. His job was to build the beer barrels and manage the beer barrels, and he came over as part of the crew on the Mayflower. We also know him probably better as the founder of Duxbury, and part of the love triangle between Priscilla Mullins and Miles Standish. So maybe not so much that one. Anyway, so moving on. Drew Brasso is our owner of the brewery and had been a craft brewer, spent 20 years on Wall Street, and had retired from the financial industry and decided he wanted to help build a business in this local environment, and he had been a home brewer. He had brewed at his time at MIT in his dorms, and had been passionate about the craft beer industry. The first time through around these areas, we remember when Sam Adams showed up on the scenes. I don't know if you guys do, but in the 80s, around then. And then we had a boom right around then. And then everybody was basically trying to make the same styles of beer. And this recent, I guess, revolution of craft beer has been much more substantial as far as individual communities. So way back, before Prohibition, we had individual breweries in neighborhoods all around the country, and different styles of beer that immigrants came over and that they wanted, whether it was a German style or an English style, Czech style, and Belgian styles of beer all around the country. And as when we came out of Prohibition, there was basically just the big guys left making lagers. And the ales had all but dropped off the market until some craft breweries and some small brew pubs kept the candle lit for the craft beer industry. And that became the seed that spawned, that brought on this next generation of craft brewers, people that sought out those beers, those English-style beers, that went to those brew pubs that were often usually remote locations, sometimes in urban locations, but that fondness for the different styles of ales is what brought on this generation of brewer. And now we've hit a whole nother stride. Right now there's over 5,000 breweries here in the United States. Right here in Massachusetts we have over 60 breweries now, and there'll be 30 more breweries signing on this year to open their doors. So what constitutes a brewery? Quite honestly, we could probably flip over that water cooler and fill it up. As long as we have a license to distribute, we could be a brewery. And so they come from as small to opening a warehouse and opening your doors and sampling your wares, to large breweries. One of the largest breweries in the country is right up the road, or their headquarters is right up the road in Boston Beer, or Samuel Adams. I believe they're number 3 in the country as far as size. They brew over 2 million barrels of beer every year. To give you some perspective, Mayflower, we brewed 8,000 barrels last year. And as big as they are compared to us, we're still in the top 200 as far as size of breweries in the country, if you can believe that. We consider ourselves a small regional brewery. We distribute beer throughout New England. We have distribution partners in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Western Mass, and then we self-distribute, we brew package, and self-distribute our beer in this neck of the woods, so everything in eastern Massachusetts. We're predominantly, and I did bring some examples of the beers that we have at the moment, we're predominantly English-style ales. We have Pale Ale, Golden Ale, IPA, or India Pale Ale, Porter, stouts along those lines. But our head brewer, Ryan Gabush, happens to have a fondness for German and Belgian-style beers. So, as is the case with most craft breweries these days, this next generation of brewer has taken all these styles and kind of created hybrid styles and different styles using Belgian yeast and English hops to create different flavors. So there's you have some style sheets I see you in front of you that kind of explain what each one of these styles are and what their origin is. And some of the styles that are getting made these days, particularly locally, don't show up on these charts. So it'll be an interesting next, 5 to 6 years in this business to see kind of where it goes. So I overheard somebody talking about a bar in Salt Lake City. Is that right?
Sorry?
Is that in Salt Lake City?
Oh, my son is there, yeah.
Yeah, so what's interesting is the styles of beer that are going on even out in Salt Lake and further across in western part of the country is different than the styles that are getting brewed down south in the southern parts of the country, which are even more different than some of the stuff we're doing here. But yet they're all called an IPA or they're all called a pale ale. And so the interpretation from these brewers is more like chefs at your local restaurant making you a pork chop or a stuffed pork chop or some lobster. It's got to be different everywhere it goes. The water is the most important ingredient in beer, and so the water between Cohasset and our brewery in Plymouth is even different. So that will impact the flavor. So the same beer made with the same ingredients will taste different. Over 90% of what is made of what beer is is water. So the other ingredients are right over here: malt, hops, and yeast. Those are the basic ingredients. There was it'll get referenced, I believe. Well, actually, I apologize, it won't get referenced in this TED Talk, but there's a beer purity law in Germany called Reinheitsgebot, and basically it states that those are the only ingredients you can include in beer. And that beer purity law has dictated most of what beer gets consumed in the country. So over 90% of the beer that's made in this country follows that standard. Now, there'll be adjuncts similar, like maple syrup, or some people are adding fruit to the beers, watermelon and blueberry and different stuff, honey and so on and so forth. But the base for the beer is generally that: malt, hops, water, and yeast. Well, this younger generation of brewers that are all graduating from schools now all around the country, and programs all around the country, are challenging that theory and making hybrid styles and coming up with different things to replace hops. So, but just to give you a quick basic idea, if you don't know, making beer is kind of like making stew or soup. So the malt would be your base, your chicken, your fish, or your tomato. The hops are more like spices, basil, oregano, thyme. They add aroma and bitterness, and that flavor will come out as you drink it. So as there is a difference between rosemary and basil, the sweetness from basil and that floral aspect you get from that, hops are very much the same. So each strand of hop will provide a different flavor. It shows up as tangerine or melon or lemon or some other type of citrus. Grapefruit is a predominant one. So you can add flavors in there. And then the malt itself comes in different varieties. So think about it like roasting coffee. You can go down to your local coffee roaster, and there are blonde or lighter versions of a coffee. Then there's the French roast and the dark roasted coffee, which is cooked a lot longer. Malting process works very much the same way. So the longer they take that malt and cook it, basically, or malt it, the barley, and they can caramelize the sugars that are inside, and you either get kind of a bready aspect from the lighter blonder styles or the Pilsner malt. Or you can cook it a little bit longer and you get a sweeter kind of caramel effect from the malt and the caramel color. Or you can cook it even longer and it tastes like burned bread out of your toaster, is what it really tastes like. But when you mix it with beer, it just tastes like delicious. That's the bigger, darker beers, the stouts, the porters, they take on that darker complexion. So the brewing process is pretty straightforward. It's more like kind of making oatmeal tea is the way I would describe it. They're flushing water through all this malt to pull all of that flavor and color from that malt, and the brewers are laying it into that into a big pot. Essentially, it's called a mash tun or a lautering tun. That they're adding hot water in there, and they're stripping all the flavor out of that grain or malt. And they take that water, that really sweet water, it's called wort, W-O-R-T, and then they'll boil it off and add hops in over, a 60 to 75 minute time frame. And then when that beer's done, it goes off to a fermenter where we add the yeast, and active yeast will eat up all that sugar and convert that sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So that's the basic brewing process. Once it's in the fermenter, it can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, depending on the beer, to have a finished product. Now at Mayflower, we filter some of our beers. We also carbonate the beer. The carbonation you get from the fermentation process isn't anything like you would get if you cracked a beer open from the store or got it on tap. That carbonation gets put into the beer at the later stages, and then we package it off. At Mayflower, we package the beer in cans, 12-ounce cans, as well as draft beer. And we do have some bottled beer, but we're transitioning out of bottles to cans. So that's basically us. I will pass this on right now to our speaker, Chad Henderson of Noda Brewing. Noda Brewing is an acclaimed brewery down in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I've watched this. This is a real interesting perspective on the brewing industry as a whole, and I echo most of his thoughts. And we'll catch up after if you guys have questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming. It's nice to meet you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Yesterday, my work day started off right about 4 o'clock in the morning. At about 4:30 in the morning, I had the first wave of a nice, good running sweat come down and get me all nice and saturated. Right around that time, I was starting to run through numbers, run through temperatures, run through different processes on the batch that we were making. Shortly after that, I started the first accumulation of really nice, gunked up hop resins underneath all my fingernails. They're still there today. They'll probably still be there in the next couple of days as well. So if I shake your hand later on, that sticky film thing, it's just hops, don't worry about it. No need to worry. Shortly after that, I'm probably covered from at least head to shoulder in a nice grain powder. It's a really thin powder from where we crack our grain and makes you sneeze about every 4 minutes or so. And all the while I'm running those numbers through and I'm tossing bags that weigh 50 to 55 pounds, all in preparation for the next step that I gotta do in the batch. All this is happening relatively before 6 o'clock in the morning. And all that while, all I'm thinking in my head, besides those numbers and besides which direction I need to turn my head in order to sneeze, all I can think is, God, I'm living the dream. And it's true. I live my dream every single day, 7 days a week, because my dream is craft beer. Now, it's funny, a lot of people say, oh, it's your dream job. It's more than a job to me. I don't even like to consider it a job. I like to consider it an actual physical embodiment of doing what I have had as a dream for years. Because when you're a kid and you dream, you're really dreaming of fantastic things. You dream of stuff that really doesn't make any sense at all and really can't happen, but you love it. And that's what gives kids that sparkle, that little extra bit of wonderment and whatnot that makes kids so lively and exciting and gives them the youth that we all wish we could reobtain. That wonderment comes with a blind hope and a blind faith that dream and that fantasy can totally come true. They don't know, the kids don't know how they can do what they want to do. They just assume it's totally possible that when they're an adult, they'll be an astronaut, president of at least 20 countries, and probably be able to fly and see through walls. It makes sense to them. It's what they know. And as we grow up and we go through school and we have social interactions and our parents teach us not to go and try to fly off of things, we realize that the stuff that we held as a dream really can't be obtained. And it's a sad thing for a kid to lose that magic, but we tend to carry that with us. Our teachers, our parents, they hand us sample plates when we're growing up, and they say, these are the actual things that are great in life that you can achieve. And they tell you the pathways to get them. And what a lot of people tend to do is they replace that concept with dream with the concept of goal. I want to have this sort of life, I want to have this sort of job, or more or less this, and I need to follow A, B, C, D, and end up at Z, and then that's it. And that's a goal. It's not necessarily a dream. Very few people in the world naturally find one of those goals as actually truly a passion they had from a young childhood. And that's very fortunate for those, but it's very rare. It's important to have goals. I'm not talking badly about goals and whatnot. They are allowing us to accomplish most of our stuff day to day and also long term. But most people who can't identify a goal as a dream will keep a hold of dreams like I did when I was younger, but we throw it into fantasy land and we assume it can't be obtained. And since we know that that pathway to get to the dream doesn't exist, we tend to carry that with any future dreams when we get into adulthood. When I was in school, when I was in college, I did just that. I had dreams. I had lots of intuition and fantasies about how to interact with certain people in different spectacles of occupations and whatnot, but I just assumed it was all just, daydreaming, not really assuming that I could ever actually obtain it. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I liked science. I liked to interact with people. I wanted to do something that people enjoyed, or at least a service that would better their life. And therefore, I went into the medical industry. I got my degree in physiology, and I worked for the majority of my young life in the medical industry. And it's a great industry, and God knows it's a necessity, obviously. But it wasn't my passion. It was right before I graduated with my degree that I found my true passion. Now, I'm not advocating that teachers should tell their 9-year-old students that when you grow up, you can be a doctor or a lawyer, or you can make hooch like mom and daddy drink. I'm not saying you should do that. There's a really good reason why they don't tell kids that in school. But, as you grow up, you see alcoholic beverages, they're around. They obviously have to get on the shelves somehow. They're going to be distributed. So there's an industry in it. So obviously, it wasn't like I discovered that beer exists all of a sudden in college, but kind of did. I found tucked in under the alcoholic production and distribution industry, an industry in itself that really was more of a community, more of a culture. And I became obsessed with it. And that culture was craft beer. And it was different than macro beer or high industrial Super Bowl advertisement beer. This was beer that had a story. This was beer that had a purpose. And the diversity and the detail and the amount of history that went into craft beer blew my mind. As a kid, I loved anything with high details, lots of storylines, lots of character development, anything like that. And seeing a list that just went forever on a computer of all the different styles, and then you click on one style and you get an equally large list of all the different examples of it, I was like, this is going to be fun to explore this world a little bit further. And I delved into it. I started brewing my own beer, found out I was good at it. Never knew when I was a kid that I had a talent for brewing beer, because I never should have been brewing beer as a kid. But I found out through attention to detail and liking the science and liking the story and the backing, I was able to make beers that I had never had before. I always made my own stuff. And I loved making it. I loved the product that came out of it. My friends really enjoyed it too. And as I got involved in the community, I'd worked festivals and started meeting the representatives from this community and realized that this was an industry where the people on black and white were competitors, but they were actually a real rich community, and they were just as much community with each other as they were with the consumers as well. And I was like, this is great. Everyone, it's like a utopia, and people from all walks of life can walk around from all sorts of different socio and economic standards and age, and you can say, do you like craft beer too? And they're like, yeah, they will immediately go together and start conversing. I've seen it happen tons of times. It's a bonding agent, just like any sort of passion that people could share. And I realized shortly after, right around that time frame, that was my dream. That was everything I was looking for, was to be in a craft beer. And it literally became my dream. I looked at brewing craft beer as my ability to fly. I looked at it in the same light as I looked at all those fantastic things I thought of as a kid that I knew couldn't actually happen. It was that important to me. Lucky for me, I found that out right before I got my degree in physiology. So I did not have the means or the time to actually pick up and go to school in either Chicago or California and get a brewer's degree. And honestly, I didn't have the guts to tell mom and dad, like, that whole college thing that I just did and got a degree in? I'm gonna just throw it away and go make some beer. It definitely doesn't go over well when mom and dad don't drink. So but I still had that passion and that drive with it, even though I was working in the medical industry. But the thing that made it different is I held it in the same light as any kid would hold a fantasy. But I kept some of my adult logic and saying that there has to be some pathway to get to this. It's not a traditional pathway, but it's got to be there. And I kept part of that childlike hope and blind faith that it could happen. And I said, I don't know how it's going to work. I don't have the money to get up and go to a school, for brewing and whatnot. I certainly don't have the time if I need to, work in the current job that I have. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to get out. I'm going to brew every chance I get. I'm going to talk to every single person that knows more than me, which when you first get into craft beer, every craft beer person knows more than you about it. And I'm going to work my butt off for free until I get in. I didn't care if I was going to be 45 years old, if I was going to get in the beer industry at that point. I was going to get in there. And I was going to use every avenue that I could find to get through. I worked festivals, not just attended festivals. I worked festivals. I hosted dinners. I hosted pairings. I hosted tastings. I hosted release parties for new breweries that were coming into the area. And I got involved in the community that became the Charlotte Craft Beer Rise. And when I started getting into craft beer, the Charlotte area was just starting to kind of cusp the acceptance of what craft beer was. And I got to sit there and explain to people why this beer tastes like sweet tarts, or why this beer tastes like it's got chocolate fudge in it and whatnot, and the whole gambit of everything in between it. So I got to meet amazing people. When I moved to Charlotte, I had one friend that I knew before coming to Charlotte that was my roommate that I moved into. And the hundreds of friends I have now are all through the craft beer community. So I got immersed in there. And when I wasn't traveling around the country doing festivals and working for charities or breweries that were kind enough to let me in, I was out at restaurants, bars, trying to mingle with the managers, see what's pouring on tap, see what everyone else there was drinking. And more than likely, if you were in the craft beer community, you were going to find one of your friends from one of the home brewers that you happen to know, or someone that you had conversed about the craft beer experience with beforehand. So I always would go around in my free time and try to get deeper into the system. And that led me to meeting a wonderful couple named Todd and Susie Ford at a local watering hole. And I was sitting at the bar by myself, and I overheard Todd say the word hops. And I rudely jumped right into the conversation. And I was like, hey, you must homebrew. I do too. What are you doing? And Todd had been brewing for longer than I had been able to drive. And so he's like, well, this is my wife, Susie. And I just rudely talked to them and brought them out of their conversation for a little while. But we had great conversation about craft beer. And we both shared a love for kind of West Coast style beer and stuff that we didn't see a huge amount of here locally in Charlotte and also in the state in general, because it's still an emerging craft beer network. And that was pretty much it for the time being from there. I said, sorry I interrupted you guys, thanks for the talk, and I'll see you later. And I saw them a couple of times on and off after that point. But basically what I did not know is that Todd and Susie had basically started the ball rolling with making this little thing called No Doubt Brewing Company. And I said, well, that's great. If you need any help promoting it for an event, let me know. I'll help promote it. And my name kept cycling over to them as a potential brewer because I was obviously energetic about it. I was obsessed with it. Spent every free moment I had, working in craft beer. And I brewed the same stuff that Todd and Susie liked and that Todd was brewing as well. So a few months after meeting them, they sat me down and they said, would you like to be our brewer? And of course I screamed yes very loudly, and I literally received my dream job after about 6 years of promoting and working and brewing constantly, brewing weekly, in fact. And I sat there and I was like, this is it. I've got it. Now I've got to earn it. That's what I looked like Monday through Friday when I met Todd and Susie up and they asked me to be their head brewer. Todd for the business occasion and everything. And then that's what I upgraded to when I went in with them. And now most people don't think that'd be an upgrade, but that was an upgrade for me. I'm standing in our floor, about waist deep. That bar I'm using to pry out our 1946 plumbing. And I'm not smiling in the picture because it smells as awesome as 1946 plumbing resurfacing as you would imagine it would be. But inside I was smiling because every time we threw a sledgehammer, every time we knocked a wall down, or every time I had to dive into really old sewage, everything along the way was going, this is getting closer to the dream. This is closer to brewing beer. And that drove me to do any messy job. No matter what we had to do to build out that place, I was willing to do it. And it was just another step closer to getting that dream job that I had, because it was handed to me, after making good connections. So there was luck involved. But I wanted to earn the right to be able to work at that location. And after we opened up, that's basically what it looked like when I was describing the Yesterday Brewing. That is actually sweat around me. That's Todd being real proud of his choice, I guess, right there. That was one of our earlier batches, actually, but that is how I feel inside when we brew. Every one of the brewers at Nardone, that's how we feel when we're up there and we're creating something. We get to go to work early, or I've slept at the brewery many times, and wake up, or just don't go to sleep at all, and be like, what are we going to create? How can we express ourselves some more? And then we get to break down and work the science out, work the math, and then go and physically labor over this thing that we've created and is an artistic expression of us. Josh was just talking about self-expression. That's what we were doing. We're putting ourselves into this product. And then we get to go out and talk to you people about it and get that social interaction. So it was everything that I wanted in a job. So that's why it was my dream job. The reason why it was my dream is for the same reason why I've had any success in this industry and why Nardone has had success, in my opinion, so far, is that we all understand the concept of what craft is. A lot of people say, what is craft beer? What makes it different than macro beer, et cetera? And a lot of people start breaking down the numbers and say, oh, it's about this amount of gain over here. It's not about that. And everybody that drinks craft beer in this audience will probably agree with me. In my mind, what makes craft beer, what makes anything craft, is the fact that it's not dependent on how many gallons you make a year. It's not dependent on how many states you're available in. It doesn't matter how long you've been around. It doesn't matter how many employees you have. What makes craft beer important is that every sip you have of craft beer, you can taste the full intent, history, and purpose behind the people that made it and pushed it to you. That's what has, thank you. That's what we do with every batch that we do. And that's what makes craft in anything, is self-expression. Just like Josh says, we may never meet. I hope I do get to meet many of you, but we may never actually talk face to face. But if you go and you drink a Nardone beer, you're drinking part of me. We're having a conversation. You're drinking part of Todd. Don't get too dirty on that idea, okay? But it's another way of communicating. You have your appearance. You have the way you look. You have what people can see and ingest in you. You have what you say and what you do to be your personality that people can intake. You can intake us in a different way because we put all of us into that product. When we hire people at Nardone, we look at how well do they fit with our group as one of the most predominant issues when they apply with us. Because if they don't fit with our team, they don't do any furthering of us expressing ourselves in our product. So it's all about self-expression. And that embodiment is what made craft beer my dream, is that craft beer is my vehicle of myself into being experienced in the wider set of community. That is what got us to this point. That's Todd and I at the Great American Beer Festival in Denver, Colorado. It's basically the Oscars of beer, if you didn't know that. We were 11 and a half months old right there, and that's the silver medal for the Robust Porter that we won for our Coca Local. So, thank you. The moment when we won that, it was literally all the digging and all the sludging and even all the tastings. Before I ever knew Todd and Susie, it was like an end-of-life experience. It all came rushing through, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience for us. And that's basically what has led me to go in every single day, day in and day out, is the idea that we are using craft beer as a vehicle to express ourselves. So I wanted to close really quickly with a story that kind of relates back to the idea of community and craft beer and the idea of being inspired and just go ahead and seizing a dream and running with it. When I did my travels around the country doing different events and whatnot, there's people that are basically like idols or beer celebrities in the beer world, just like there's celebrities of sports, there's celebrities in every industry. It's like, oh, there's that guy, he did such and such. My first idol in the beer industry was Sam Calagione, and he was really the first person that got me intertwined in the concept of creating something outside the box, really expressing yourself. And that's what caused me to start brewing beer. And I had gotten a chance to meet Sam multiple times and gotten to work with him a couple times as well. And when I got asked to do TEDx here, I was really honored that to be offered, obviously, to be here and whatnot amongst all the speakers. But also, I found out that Sam himself was a TEDx speaker. And I was like, oh my gosh, and he was one of the only brewery reps that has actually been a TEDx speaker. So I was like, I'm part of a short list with my idol. which was really great. So back in 2010, I gotta hurry up, I'm sorry. Back in 2010, I got a chance to work with Sam at a long festival. And to thank me, he basically sent a package that said a thank you letter in it, and also gave me a hat, a bottle opener, and he also gave me a bottle of my favorite beer that they do. I told him it was my favorite beer, and it's called Old School. It's a 15% alcohol barley wine with figs and dates in it. It's fantastic. And he sent me one from his own personal cellar, already vintage in 2006. So I freaked out. And I called my roommate, who was at the time, who was Charles. I was like, Charles, get downstairs. Sam gave me a package. And so he comes running down the stairs. It was like Santa Claus had come to us. And I was like, you're witness to this. I wrote from Sam on it. I was like, you're witness to this. I'm not opening this bottle until either it is 10 years old in 2016, or I get my dream job as a brewer at a brewery. And on October 29, 2011, we opened Noda, and I and my good friend Brian Misser, who now works with us, videotaped a response to Sam, thanking him for the beer, thanking him for the inspiration, poured the beer and toasted him, and it was the best beer I ever had. And 2 days after that post got sent out, I got another thank you letter from Sam, and I got another bottle of it as well. So I felt it only right that since we are now part of a short list of these TEDx speakers, that I split my favorite beer from them with you guys, but I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Todd and Susie. So Todd and Susie, come up and drink with me. I couldn't be here without my parents either. They're here in the audience. I know, that's what I do. But cheers, and thank you guys so much for giving me the time to talk to all of you guys about my life and some important parts of it, and obviously the industry that I'm extremely lucky and fortunate to be a part of. Do yourself a favor and seek out those that use self-expression and use their passion and their vehicle as their vehicle to do their craft and be craft. Find your own vehicle and set it to your own dream. So cheers. Thank you guys.
We're all master brewers now, right? All ready to go and dive into a mash tun, stop lautering up, adding in the hops and the barley and the yeast and everything else. So, the passion that Chad talks about in his video, I think, is self-evident. When I started drinking beer, I was in college. I wasn't necessarily attending that college. I was visiting that college to see whether or not I wanted to go there. But back in the day, of course, you were offered, different beers, usually from friends, from family members. Hey, have a taste, son, go ahead, It's a celebration time, it's something to share, something to be part of. So the first beers, obviously, that I was introduced to were the traditional type of adjunct, kind of like lagering beers from like a Budweiser, a Miller, or a Coors, that type of thing. So when I grew up, that was the only things that I thought beer was, that beer could be. As I got into college and began to meet different people, have different experiences, during the 1990s when I was going to Bridgewater State College, then called Bridgewater State College, now university, introduced to the craft beer renaissance that was going on in the country at the time, primarily first with Sam Adams, obviously being the most local one here in New England and Massachusetts state. Harpoon being one of actually the first one that was actually licensed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, beer license number 1 by Harpoon Brewery, introduced to their beers, and began to wonder about what types of different beers there were. It's almost like music. When I got introduced to the blues and jazz was through like Led Zeppelin. And then it was like, wow. And then my friend of mine was like, okay, you just listened to Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin, now hear this by this blues artist. And you could hear like different rhythms, the similar rhythms and the different beats and everything else. And it was like, whoa, that's kind of where they got their inspiration from? Yeah, that's where they got their inspiration from. So as you begin to taste different types of beers, different types of style of beers, you learn about the brewing process. You learn about how much goes into the actual fact of, from concept to actual implementation in the brewing process is really something that's magical. Something that is, the people who are involved in it, friends of mine at Mayflower like Jeff and others who I've met throughout the United States, really, My boss will attest to you that when I go on my vacations, usually in October, and head up to Vermont, New Hampshire, she knows where I'm going. I'm going up to visit my friend at all the different breweries and to see what they've got. We really are blessed in this area in terms of New England of having such wonderful craft beer breweries with people experimenting all the time with different styles, testing and pushing the boundaries and testing the limits as to what Jeff was talking about earlier about the Reinheitsgebot, which was instituted in 1516, I believe, in Germany for many reasons, to keep beer prices down, but also to kind of have a standard for what beers were supposed to be. But then that kind of got locked in, and everybody thought that that was the only thing that beers were supposed to be. Well, now the brewers nowadays are challenging that, experimenting. Chad from Noda in his TED Talk mentioned about Sam Calagione, Dogfish Head Brewing in Delaware, is one of those kind of like crazy first generation craft beer brewers that were pushing the boundaries long before a lot of the other brewers started doing it. You know, putting like maple syrup in beer, throwing in chicory sticks and this, that, and everything else. People were like, "Oh, you guys are nuts, you guys are crazy, what are you doing?" And Sam was just like, "We're doing it, we're experimenting, we're trying it, and if it's good, it's worthy, you know, people are gonna obviously buy our product to keep us in business. And also, if it's worthy and it's a good beer, you're gonna enjoy it. You know, something to savor with your friends, your family, something to share." Similar to what Jeff and others are doing at Mayflower and my local brewery, testing, you know, the limits, you know, pushing the boundaries. So for craft beer brewing, it's really an exciting time this past 20 years of this craft beer renaissance that has been happening here in the United States of America. And the fact that we're here today talking about it, we have this TED Talk, we're able to introduce to maybe of many of you who have not experienced craft beer and maybe not had the chance to maybe go out and taste it yourselves. Something that you might want to try, something that you can definitely look forward to and experience. And you know, it's an exciting thing, something that's fascinating to talk to brewers about, hear their passion. This is a calling for them. I mean, Ryan, who's the head brewer at Mayflower, it's a calling for him. It's something that he's very, very passionate about, cares about deeply. And I think if you meet all the other brewers at all the different places that you go to, or you know, if you happen to go to like beer tasting shows or different places where they're having, say, tastings, even local liquor stores will do it. If you have a chance to talk to the brewers, assistant brewers, or whoever it is who's helping in the brewing process, you will feel that passion that they have for doing this. And it's something that's really a very unique and wonderful thing that's going on. So rather than me ramble on any further at this point, certainly want to take any questions that you might have from the audience. Jeff is still here as well. So I'd certainly open up the floor if anybody has any questions you'd like to ask about the craft brewing process, maybe a little bit about how it goes about doing it. Certainly thank you again, once again, for coming here today. Sir?
With so many craft beers in this area, one would wonder how their economically survival rate. If there's so many, how can they actually make money to pay the employees and so forth and so on?
It's a good question, and it's actually something that many people are asking, you know, is there like a bubble approaching for the craft beer industry? Because there's so many, I think, Jeff, what was it, 5,300 or something as of last year in the United States alone. Massachusetts has around 50 or 60 now, and there's another 30, I think you said, we're adding on to this coming year. One of the things, and it has been discussed among people in the craft beer industry about are we reaching a peak, are we reaching a ceiling, is it going to be you know, a cliff to fall off of? I don't really think anybody has the answer to that question. From my research and what I've done from history and talking to different people in the craft beer brewing history that's gone back really since the beginning of this country. I mean, George Washington had a distillery at Mount Vernon. People have...
I was going to say, to start a brewery up, it would seem to me there's quite a bit of money involved in investing in the machinery to get it off the ground, so to speak.
There is an expense involved in it. I think Jeff may be able to speak a little bit better than that than I can. But you can have a very small barrel system or a home brew system in which you're brewing pretty good, consistent quality beer. It might not be the level of, say, like a Mayflower or a Harpoon a Boston beer company that Sam Adams it does. But there are a number of breweries in this area, for example, I think was in Norton, Bog Iron in Norton, very, very small brewing system. It's like the basement of his house. He's in like an industrial area off the main highway, but it's almost like you go into a small door, and there's a sign hanging outside Bog Iron Brewing, and it's a very small barrel system. So yes, we're in the sense that there's a lot of maybe sweat equity that's put in initially, and there is a certain expense initial for it. I think that once you can get started, excuse me, once you can get started, and actually with the brewing process, depending on how big you want to go, you could be a relatively small economic system and put out some pretty good consistent beers. I don't know if Jeff wants to maybe speak a little bit about that. Certainly when Drew started in Mayflower.
Yeah, there's actually industries that have been created around this. So there's a few different options for craft brewers when they start up. Most of them start up with their own recipe and drilling things down the way they want their beers to look and feel and taste. And that's a lot more along the lines of the home brewing process. Everything's done on smaller systems. There is some beers that can scale up to large production facilities, and then some, it's definitely going to change the perspective of the beer, the flavor, the look. Those ingredients might not be available in large quantity. So the few different options are, one, a brewer could go and rent space from a larger brewery and use their system. Other breweries contract out. So up on the North Shore is one of the largest contract breweries where they brew Ipswich beer. Up on the North Shore, Mercury Brewing brews beer for, I've lost track. I think it's at least 5 to 10 other breweries make their beer out of that facility. So if you have a recipe nowadays and you have a good concept and you want to start a business, you can do it. Whether the beer is good or bad, you can still do it. Whether there's demand for it or not. To your point, that bubble that Richie referred to, I am the director of sales for Mayflower Brewing. I'm in charge of selling the beer and getting it out into the market and marketing the beer. That is my number one concern, is how many more can we put in here? How many more shelves are there in the package store? How many more draft lines are there at every restaurant? So everyone in the business is concerned about that. Chad talks about the industry being a very welcoming but yet competitive industry. It's true. It's getting a little tighter these days. I don't know that everyone welcomed New Belgium in with open arms, which was a very large brewery from Colorado that just showed up on our doorstep. I drank New Belgium years ago in the early 90s when I was living in Arizona. It was delicious. I enjoyed it then. Now I'm in the business. Welcome, but stay away from my draft lines. So there is a competitive nature to it. I think what we're seeing, though, is what I referred to before. Pre-prohibition, my mother's uncle ran Croft Brewing. He owned Croft Brewing in Jamaica Plain. And that they made Pickwick Ale and I don't know, some of the other beers, if you remember. That's since come and gone, but that's what you're finding now. Almost exactly in that space is where Sam Adams has their other brewery, and yet another brewery, Something Turtle Brewing, I'm losing the name of it because they just filed, and they're opening their doors right around the corner from there. So the bottom line is everyone in your communities, whether you're here in Cohasset and you want to go downtown and have a pint, you might be able to find at some point nothing but local beer just made on the South Shore, or beer that's made just in Massachusetts, or beer that's made just in Cohasset or Hingham. So you have a brewery in Hingham, there's another one over in Weymouth, there's one over in Canton, there's two in Canton. There's two, soon to be 4 breweries in Plymouth. There's one in Whitman, there's one in Norton, there's one in Lakeville. So they're in, some are big, some are small, but the beauty for you guys, and to me, this is the best time to be a craft beer drinker. Let us worry about the bubble. The good news is, you're getting the freshest beer possible. Beer is like produce. The fresher, the better. Those beers they never taste any better than when they come fresh from the brewery and they're less than 30 days. Now, does that mean a beer has to be less than 30 days? No. But it just tastes better. So the good news is you're getting fresh beer all the time. If you want to go to the breweries, it's a great opportunity. I know we run tours at our brewery where you can walk through and see all the different machines that we're using and the vessels we're using. And then if you go over to Bog Iron, you'll see those exact same pieces of machinery, but they're just smaller. And the industry revolving around that is they're building machines now for smaller breweries. They're building canning lines and bottling lines for smaller breweries. Yes?
I just thought of another question.
All right.
Sometimes when we have somebody over, we don't use the beer. And we've had cases, not cases of beer, but times when beer has been over a year old.
Mm.
Is there a time when you can't use beer, that it's like 1 or 2 years old, or is it always good if you don't open it up?
I suppose the easiest way to answer that is it depends on your taste buds.
Huh?
It depends on your taste buds. The beer as intended from the brewer, depending on the style, we're talking maybe 6 months depending on the style, but most beer, if you want to consume it these days, some of the craft beer, within 90 days is probably
But
ideal.
it'd still be safe if you kept it.
Absolutely. It's not milk, it's not going to turn, it won't make you sick, it shouldn't make you sick. I should say that, not a disclaimer for the whole industry. But, so for instance, just to give you some perspective, so we have a beer called Evolupulin, and that is our double IPA. It has, I went through the brewing process with you briefly. What happens when that beer is now in that fermenter, they have a process called dry hopping. Okay, and so they add the hops directly to the fermentation tank. And what that does is that enhances the aroma, and it therefore enhances the flavor of the beer with those particular hops. That dry hopping effect wears off. It starts wearing off. The aroma starts going away after 30 days, and after 60 it's even less, and after 90 it's not the same beer that it was, and the beer has changed into something else. Now, it's not bad. Some people prefer it. Some people like to age beers depending on the style, but if you have a hoppy beer or a beer that has a very strong hop profile, that spice, that aroma, those beers you should have young. But if you have a oatmeal stout, our oatmeal stout, for instance, I found in the back of a cooler in a package store here on the South Shore. It's been there for 12 months. We cracked it open. It was as stable as the foundation that the building was on. It tasted exactly the same. That beer is more dependent on the 5 different types of malt and the 3 different types of oats we put in there. That beer, the focus for that beer is more on the malt end as opposed to the hop end. So if that makes sense. It really depends on the beer. The other thing about aging beer, anything that's over 6% alcohol, which is relatively about half of that of wine, a glass of wine's around 13 in that ballpark. Anything that's over 6%, you can start to age. So we have another beer we call our Thanksgiving Ale, the one and only Thanksgiving Ale in the world, I should say. So that beer we make once a year, and that beer is designed to be aged. That beer is aged for 6 weeks in the fermenters. We add oak spirals so it takes on the flavor of a barrel aging process. There's 7 different types of malt in there. We add a little brown sugar in there. There's a little rye in there. So this is a very complex beer. The oak early on is very dominant. And then over time, the body of the beer becomes much more velvety and smooth, more like liquor than beer, and that oak flavor blends in, and it becomes just kind of a vanilla background flavor, which it blends together. So that beer is designed for aging, whereas our Evolupulin if it's after 30 days, I wouldn't return it to a store or anything like that. It's not bad, but you're getting a different perspective than if you had that beer on tap fresh.
Are farms around this area, are they growing hops or?
Sure. That industry, that's a whole other industry here in Massachusetts that's growing with us. Not only hops, so hops are becoming a much more economically reasonable crop for farmers to grow, so they can get the same.
Because I've read some of the mystery stories in England. There are certain areas of England where I guess people from London used to go out into the countryside and pick the hops.
Right.
And that seemed to be like a big thing in England, but I
Mhm.
never heard about it here in the United States.
Yeah, and I think it's just because farmers were getting a better return on their land with different crops. And now that the craft beer industry is booming and growing, and there's a local hop grower out in Western Mass, and they also grow malt as well. Now, they took a risk. They were one of the first ones to start doing it up here. Most of the hops that are getting put into beers are grown in the Pacific Northwest. There are some hops that are grown over in Europe and down in New Zealand as well. Those are kind of the bigger areas where some of these hops are being grown at the moment, and then it all goes through brokerage firms who we buy our hops from. So it's all prepared and comes in all put together, so we can just mix up whatever we want. So, but that industry is starting to grow more here in Massachusetts in particular. So there's been quite a number actually of 100% Massachusetts grown and raised beers that have been produced by local breweries. So.
I have 3 questions and a frustration.
Yes.
The first question is, with all of these craft brews and only X amount of space in a pub, who makes the decision as to which craft beer is going to be marketed, and how is that decision made?
So as far as the marketing, that would be the individual company itself, right? And so we have opportunities to have business partners, our distributors. So for instance, I don't know if you've heard of El Knife, down the road in Kingston, they're a local bud distributor, or up this way a little bit more, Burke Distributing over in Avon. These guys will partner with us. They purchase the beer from us and then they sell it. So in that case, depending on their portfolio, they'll determine a priority list of who they sell first and why. The individual pubs themselves, they have a whole infrastructure on who makes the choice. It's our job as a small independent brewery, and we have a sales team of 8 sales reps that I manage. Our job is to go in and find out who's making those decisions. Our best sales tool is cracking the beer open, and we're very confident in the quality and the consistency of our product, that once we do get it open, the presentation takes care of itself. And then after that, it's like any other industry. It's features and benefits and selling and making things, finding the right angle to appeal to people. The real driver about who gets what on tap, quite honestly, is you guys. If you go into a pub and it doesn't matter to you what you're drinking, then it's less likely that those things will change. But if it does matter and you do ask for specific styles, that bar that your son owns or is running.
No, it's his house.
Oh, even better. Even better. Oh my goodness, how awesome. 16 draft points.
Yeah, 16 on draft.
That's fantastic. So the bottom line is it's the consumer who drives the need and the demand. So our number 1 style across the board being produced in the United States is an India Pale Ale. Now, I could pour India Pale Ale for you guys here, and there might not be anybody in this room that likes it. Well, there'd be one, or at least 2, that I know of. But the bottom line is, there's a beer out there for all of you. I promise you that. I've yet to find a person that hasn't liked the style at some point in the spectrum. There's just too many styles out there. But it's ultimately you guys that will determine what stays and goes. Now, it's a lot of bars will rotate what they have on to provide some variety. But it's the same in any other industry. The things that sell are the things that stay. So.
The, another question I have is, Sam Adams is mainstream now? Is it still a craft beer? Has it
Sure,
moved
yeah.
over?
Yeah, so I would say Chad's definition of craft is pretty much my thought as well. Now, there's an exact definition of what is a craft brewery that's defined by the Brewers Association, and bottom line is they just keep upping that number so Sam and Sierra Nevada stay in the craft beer industry. So it's a number of barrels of beer that you produce in a year. And then they have regional brewers, and then there's, it's not called micro anymore, it's called craft. So, but there are smaller versions of you know, the brew pubs and then the individual small breweries. So, yes, they're craft. There has been very few. It's and because they are big, they you know, we know this as Patriot fans. When you're doing something really well, everybody likes to disregard. Hopefully, you're Patriots fans. Otherwise, I'm out of here. But you know, when you're doing well, everybody you know likes to pick on you a little bit, and Sam does take a little bit of heat for that. But Boston Beer has been one of the biggest advocates for the craft brewing industry, and is the reason why, one of the reasons why, why craft beer has maintained all throughout. They provide small loans for local tiny brewers that get started. When they have extra hops that aren't available, they'll auction them off and lottery them off and give them away. They are super helpful with local brewers, but they also have Super Bowl ads. They put craft beer on the Super Bowl. They have people looking at what's in my beer, not just what is this beer. You know, it's not just the same style like Richie said. I grew up in Plymouth, and so when I went off to college, I went to Southern Maine and ended up in the brew pub of what became Shipyard Brewing Company, and that was just our local pub. That's where we played darts and foosball. And so when we went there, we had ales and IPAs and porters and stouts, and now we're trying all these different styles of beer and realizing there's flavor in there and different things. So Sam Adams has Miller Lite referencing triple hops brewed. You know, they add 3 hops in there, okay? You know, there's 7 in some of ours. So, but the bottom line is they have the big guys mentioning their grain. They have the big guys mentioning their water. Coors Light is talking about mountain water. You know, they've talked about it for years, but not to this degree. And it's because of Sam Adams and in this neck of the woods, it's Sierra Nevada out west. Because of those breweries talking about what's in your beer and making people look at it, that has been such I suppose that's helped them lead the charge and piqued interest from you know, consumers when you go to the store.
Did you say there's no difference between bottled beer and canned beer in terms of taste? Because, I mean, people swear there is.
Sure. There shouldn't be. The beer that goes in the vessel comes out of the tank and gets split up, whether it goes to a keg, a can, or a bottle. Now, the one big benefit that a can has, and part of the reason why we're switching over, is the shelf life will get extended on occasion. 2 biggest killers of good tasting beer, one is oxygen and the other is sunlight. And so if the beer isn't capped right and the oxygen gets in the container, if it's not packaged properly, that can certainly impact the flavor of the beer in the same way it would a 2-liter bottle of soda or some seltzer or something along those lines. Once the oxygen gets in there, the fizz goes and some of the flavor goes and kind of has a cardboardy taste. Now, light will give it that skunky taste, you know, that kind of sulfury flavor and smell. If you leave, even if you have a light beer, you're sitting out on a patio having some lobster or some clam chowder or something, and you get a nice beer and you're sitting enjoying it in the sunshine, by the time you finish that beer, if you put your nose to it, you'll smell it. You'll smell a little bit of a sulfury smell that's coming off, and that's the sunlight is impacting the beer, and it happens almost immediately. So
I mean, you're not drinking it fast enough, though.
that's the way I would look at it. As my wife would say, "You're done already?" We're just preserving the beer's quality.
My frustration is that you have some of the new craft beers
Sure.
that are marketed heavily,
Mhm.
and they're always suggested to you when you go into a pub. Well, then you start liking it,
Mhm.
and not that you get hooked on it, but you prefer it,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden it's seasonal, so it's gone. And
Right,
then you can't always buy it, you
right.
know, in the liquor store or anything like that. You know, that's a frustration.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a frustration, and so we're kind of caught in this cycle right now, and it's very easy for a lot of people to blame it on the millennials or the ADHD generations that are looking for what's new, but that's basically what they're looking for. So, you know, as I was looking up Chad in their brewery down in Charlotte, they have a brewing series, and we'll have one as well. They have a new beer every week. And so when you go to the brewery every week, there's at least one of those beers wasn't on last week. And so it creates this newness. And so the stores nowadays, because we're catching up to beer from all over the country, and if you walk into a package store, it'll say newly arrived, or, you know, when you walk into the store, they'll have a section of craft beer. A lot of stores now will have local beer, or New England beer, or Massachusetts beer, or then there will be new beer just arrived, or they'll be marketing it in that respect. So that newness is creating that, okay? Because you know, there are breweries like ours, we can sell beer everywhere in the world if we want, as small as we are. All we need to do is make a phone call and ship beer, and it can get distributed. And so that's what happens. And then a lot of times they'll get a shipment in, and that was the shipment, and they're waiting for more, or they run out, or there's not enough to go to every store, because we have a few stores here in Massachusetts, right? So there's a lot of options where you can get it. As far as the seasonal stuff, that's part of providing, you know, a variety over the year. Now, seasonal beer for us at Mayflower is, we take it seriously in the sense that, what do we want to drink when it's hot out? What do we want to drink when it's cold out? What do we want to drink in the fall? What do we want to drink in the spring? So our beers are designed around these times of year. Heavier beers in the winter. Our summer beer is 3.8% and is super dry, and it's very light. And so it depends on the brewery and their interpretation of that. I know breweries that have a double IPA in the summer, so just because it's when they want to drink beer outside. So everybody's different in what they want. Our brewery, we kind of focus on the seasons and the weather around here in New England and try to release beers along those lines. Now, with that being said, part of that seasonality of it creates a little demand, and people anticipate that, and so that's kind of the business end of things. But the biggest way to change that, as far as beers rotating in and out of your local stores, is just, you know, ask the fellows over at Curtis, hey, you know, can you get more of that in? Can you get more of this in? It's the same way you'd ask for a case of wine, or you'd ask for some scotch or whatever, anything particular. The stores are working hard to satisfy your demands and your needs, so if they can get it, generally they'll get it in. The stores are great about that. The bars are a little trickier because there's less landscape, real estate for them to deal with. So,
Are you doing any of the Goza or Brett type beers?
we actually just had a Goza. We have what we call our Cooper series in homage to John Alden, of course, the Cooper. Cooper series represents anything that's kind of a one-off, or we made it once, or we made a small batch of it. So right now, our Cooper series is called Bradford, William Bradford. It's a Belgian triple ale. This is 9%. It's all malt, Belgian yeast. The hops are, you know, basically in there to balance things out, but they don't play a real role. So, you know, before that, we had what we call Salty Paul. He was a brewer at the brewery who was very salty, but that was a Goza, and we named that beer after him. But we've done Gozas, we've done Berliner Weiss, we've done Maybach, we've done Marzens, we've done Oktoberfest beers, or Marzens. So it's it depends, and we have a new series. Our tasting room just got redone and renovated, and we expanded our space. But one of the new additions we're going to add is something called the Ebb and Flow series, which will be the brewery only. It'll only be available at the brewery. The brewery will make it specifically for the brewery taps, and you can come in and get it there. So it won't be available in the stores, hence the frustration. I appreciate that. But we pour full pints and it's a nice room, so we
You
want
can
to
get on
have it there.
Mayflower then, see?
We can do a group trip.
Absolutely,
The
field trips
last-
well.
Very good, very good.
Yes,
I was just curious, Lagunitas,
yes.
that's a pale ale?
So Lagunitas has probably 20 to 30
All
different
kinds
beers.
of-
Yeah.
yeah.
But they have an IPA, a pale ale. They're one of the big breweries that they got so big, and they got to a point, and they recently just sold to Heineken. So Heineken now owns them more than 50%. But they're still making, their beers. I believe they're still making them in their facilities with their people. I don't think anyone can
I'd
find
never
them.
heard of them, and then all of a sudden, there's like 20 kinds of beer.
Right. Yeah, they're a big partner with one of the local distributors.
Now, will their beer consistency change because they went over to Heineken?
I don't,
You
it
don't.
depends on your perspective. I'll leave that up to you.
Okay.
I'm not gonna slander other breweries, but theoretically, as you expand and you make things bigger, not everything's as available in that quantity as I mentioned before, so you might have to substitute this malt for that or this for that. Now, they were huge before, so I don't think that they'll have that issue. Consistency, I don't think will be an issue with Lagunitas, but. Thank you guys so much for your attention, I appreciate it.
Very good,
Hopefully you'll come to visit us at the
very
brewery.
interesting.
Jeff, thank you very much. So on behalf of Cohasset Elder Affairs, Jeff Nardone from Mayflower Brewing Company and Chad from NODA, appreciate you guys coming to TED Talk today. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
Good job,
There's some
Christie.